Welcome back to the channel. I'm Dr. Vinay Prasad. I'm a professor of epidemiology here at the University of California, San Francisco. I'm a practicing hemonc doc, and I've got a very interesting research report to discuss with you today. It is by the Cochrane collaboration. That is the premier evidence-based organization in biomedicine. They really do follow evidence-based medicine. Well, depending on who the author of the review is. In this case, it's Tom Jefferson, so they're going to do a good job because he's a good reviewer. It's entitled Physical Interventions to Interrupt or Reduce the Spread of Respiratory Virus. It's about all the non-pharmacologic interventions, those NPIs, to interrupt or reduce the spread of respiratory viruses, including flu and SARS-CoV-2. And this is going to get into many things. I'm going to focus on the hottest of the hot issues, which is community masking, either cloth or surgical mask, and N95 masking for healthcare workers, okay? The Cochrane collaboration, they're a trusted research network. Sometimes they get it wrong if they pick a bad reviewer, but here they got Tom Jefferson. He's premier. He's a guy who did Tamiflu from the BMJ. He is in Italy. He is fantastic, and he is taking a deep look into this with a team of experts. Everything they do is pre-registered. This is the creme de la creme of evidence-based medicine when it comes to masking, okay? Let's see what they find. This is the major takeaway finding. This is analysis of all of the randomized controlled trials of masking, both in the community and healthcare settings, with a general population, medical or surgical masks, to no masks for preventing the spread of a viral respiratory illness. Whatever you want. This is the pooled analysis. 276,000 participants, and you get a relative risk reduction of 0.95. But it's not significant. The confidence interval goes from 0.84 to 1.09. Basically, maybe at best a mild effect, but most likely no effect at all. We've not proven that there is an effect. Let me put it that way. That's the right way to put it. And what about, that's for ILI. What's ILI? ILI is influenza-like illness or COVID-like illness where you feel like you might have influenza or COVID. Ultimately, we care about how we feel over the course of a respiratory virus season, and so I think ILI is actually kind of a pretty useful endpoint. But if you're a purist, you want to know, do you reduce ILI, influenza-like illness, caused by influenza, or COVID-like illness caused by SARS-CoV-2, the actual proven, documented case? And that's the second endpoint they look at here. Relative risk reduction, a 1.01. Oh boy, 1.01 means it's a wash. Doesn't do anything. Confidence interval goes from 0.72 to 1.42. And adverse events, poorly documented. They don't really get into what the downsides are, contrary to some of the real public health experts. I see, if you're a real COVIDian, zero COVID zealot, you believed in masking 2-year-olds, you don't believe in randomized trials of boosters, there's a place for you in public health. It's the dean of a university. That's what they're going to promote you to the top. But, that's a separate issue. This is conclusive. I mean, Cochrane is looking at the randomized control trials in the space. They're pulling all the studies, and they're finding, you just don't have credible evidence. And I want to tell you this. The science didn't change. The science never changed. This was the Cochrane review pre-COVID. It's the review we did very early on in COVID, which I'm going to show you at the end in the Cato Institute. The science is the same. What changed was the public health experts started lying. You see, Anthony Fauci told the truth when he went on 60 Minutes the first time. The second time when he said you ought to wear a cloth mask, that was when he was lying. There was always a lie. It just wasn't the one you thought was a lie. It was the second one. And then they kept lying because the randomized evidence is the gold standard evidence. Let's make another point. Why is randomized evidence the gold standard? I mean, why can't we just compare Pima and Maricopa counties and say, if one county does more masking, let's look at the COVID difference by places who mask and places that don't. Well, it turns out that places that mask and places that they don't, they have other differences besides masking. People may take part in precautions to a different degree. They may have a different attitude about vaccination, about boosting, about how often you go out. They may vote for different politicians. They may have different propensity to report even having had COVID-19. They may just have an illness and tough it out at home, depending on your view of the world and COVID-19 in it. And so comparing places across America is a fool's errand. Randomization doesn't balance all the confounders, but what it does is equilibrate the outcome distribution in the absence of a therapeutic effect. So you can isolate the treatment effect, okay? That's the beauty of randomization. And if you're worried that individual level randomization can only test the hypothesis of whether or not my mask benefits me, and that's factually the case, individual level randomization can only test that, But there's a way around it. Cluster level randomization can test whether my mask protects me or whether it protects you. And we're going to come to that later because the cluster randomized data is also pretty sobering, pretty negative. We have Bangladesh, which I'll come to. Oh boy. This is for the key endpoint. Our analysis suggests wearing a medical or surgical mask probably makes little or no difference compared to not wearing a mask for the outcome of laboratory-confirmed influenza or laboratory-confirmed SARS-CoV-2. Boom! There you have it. This is the reality. This is what the evidence always showed. The reason we even think otherwise is because they're vocal proponents who don't really know evidence-based medicine. One of these proponents actually put out a color-coded chart of risk where the colors went across a spectrum to show you higher risk and lower risk when confronted with the fact that there was no evidence that some activities were red and some were in orange. There was no evidence that the red was really more risky than the orange. This person said, this isn't a quantitative color coding, it's qualitative. But that doesn't make any sense at all, does it? And that reflects the kind of attitudes here. The people who don't make any sense at all. They don't know how to read literature. You have to read randomized literature. When there are multiple randomized controlled trials, that's what we take. And the randomized trials are deadly sobering. This is the key. We saw the recent Canadian study, which I talked about on this channel. N95, the respirator, compared to medical or surgical masks to prevent the spread of respiratory viral infection. And here you have it. The confidence intervals, they all cross 1 for respiratory illness, for influenza-like illness, that is just the symptoms, and for laboratory-confirmed influenza. It all crosses 1. And the recent non-inferiority study of N95 or surgical masks that appeared in the Annals of Internal Medicine also shows that it is non-inferior. You can quibble a little bit about the upper bound of the hazard ratio, but I don't quibble with it, actually, because it makes a lot of sense when you're going to be living on this planet for a long time. Go check out my prior video on that. What about the real world? I mean, we don't have a randomized trial that advises individuals to wearing a cluster or wearing a N95 mask in the community or not, measuring their rates of COVID-19. We don't have that study. That's a deficiency. That's the failure of NIAID director. And who is the NIAID director who controls the research budget for randomized controlled trials of things like this? And it is Anthony Fauci. My God, the guy who's on TV lying about it won't even run a trial. That is an irony. That is a real deep irony in this space, but it's his failure, and it's the failure of the CDC, because these zealots actually recommend cloth masking 2-year-olds except for when they nap and sleep in the same room. This is literally what they're saying, except for when they nap, where they could take it off for 2 hours because the virus naps too. And we don't need to do any studies to prove that this works. And if you dispute that it works, you are wrong. Well, that's really kind of a backwards way of looking at it. As an expert from Europe once told me, you don't even need to know how to read data to know masking 2-year-olds doesn't help. You just need to have eyes and know how to use them. Well, they don't know how to use them. So this, I think, is actually sobering for N95. And the reality right now is when I see people wearing N95 all the time, I walk over their shoulder and I look, and right at the bridge of their nose, you know what I see? I see a clear path to their respiratory passage because it's not actually pressed down there. They're not even wearing it correctly, okay? These are well-done randomized studies that show no effect. Those kind of mask wearing is a fool's errand. And also, what is the purpose at this point? I mean, you've done all you can to mitigate your risk, and if you plan on being around this planet for a while, you're going to meet SARS-CoV-2, end of story. So this is how they conclude N95 respirators. Compared with wearing medical or surgical masks, wearing N95 respirators probably makes little to no difference in how many people have confirmed flu, and may make little to no difference in how many people catch a flu-like illness. Unwanted effects were not well reported. Discomfort was noted. Anyone who's worn these correctly know that it don't feel good. It don't feel good to wear it for a long time. I always say, I saw somebody in the 190, 200 degree, the day it actually read in the thermostat, 200 degree Fahrenheit sauna, or in an N95 mask. It wasn't validated for the surface of Venus, okay? It wasn't ever tested under those conditions. Today I saw something even more absurd. Somebody waltzed in there, obviously a different person, somebody more daring because they took some risks, because they were wearing a surgical mask, a cheap, spun trash surgical mask that they pass out at the front of the hospital. They were wearing it in the sauna. Are those fibers even rated to go to that temperature? I don't know. And what is the goal of this? The air is just leaking right around the mask willy-nilly. What are you doing in there? Okay. And interestingly, one of the pushbacks online was, how does it affect you? It's just their personal health choice. But by that logic, how would it affect you if somebody decided to take hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin? It doesn't affect you, but yet we still speak out against situations where there are no randomized trials that support it and randomized trials that show harm, even if it only affects those people, to provide guidance, okay? And so providing guidance would tell you, if you're going in a sauna, I want you to know, I think it's crazy to wear an N95 mask in a sauna. And no sensible person would advise you to wear an N95 mask in a sauna. It's not rated for that. And I don't know what you're trying to accomplish. Either don't go in the sauna. You don't want to go, don't go in the sauna. But don't think an N95 mask. And even, I hate to say it, it could even be dangerous if you were alone in the sauna with a mask on and you started to have a little bit difficulty breathing. Who's going to be in there to bail you out, okay? And the sweat that enters the N95 mask might not make it work so well. I don't know. I'm just saying, okay? It's pretty silly to do. My mask helps you, not me. These studies were incapable of studying the real hypothesis, which is that masks help others. Well, guess what? We have a cluster randomized control trial called Bangladesh. And it has a huge imbalance in the starting groups. Just to make the numbers simple, one group has 100,000 people, one group has 110,000 people. It's slightly off, but one group has an excess in about 9 or 10%. So for every 10 people in one arm, the no mask arm, there's an 11th person in the mask arm. How could that be? That could only be the case in a randomized study if there was something about that arm that made people think differently about it at the moment they consent to randomization. And in fact, there very likely was. So this is called a bias of failure to conceal. We have blinding, which means you don't know what you get in a randomized study. And we have concealment, which is you don't know which arm you're going into when you enter the randomized study. If you fail to conceal and you know you're going to get a freebie in the mask arm and you know that you're not in the control arm, there might be more desire to sign up in the mask arm villages. In fact, on average, an 11th person might sign up for every 10 in the mask arm. That's kind of what we see. But then you have a big problem because you no longer have a randomized controlled trial. You have a trial with a fundamental imbalance. There's an 11th person hanging out on that arm. And is that 11th person the kind of person who'd only sign up for a trial if they're getting a freebie but won't sign up for a trial when they're not? Are they equally likely to dial that phone number when they think they have COVID and go have they do a seroprevalence test when they think they have COVID as the people in the other arm? And I would argue no. They're not equally likely. They're probably less likely. And so that little bias is such a big bias that it thwarts the minuscule reduction in symptom-driven seroprevalence of the Bangladesh study, okay? It's a big problem that they're facing in that study. So this claim could be interrogated in a randomized study. The zealots who think masking helps, my mask helps you, not me, could test it in a cluster fashion. They've chosen not to do that. The only people who ever did was the Yale University and this Guinea-Bissau study, which I'm going to talk about, I guess, in a future video. Unfortunately, it's got a lot of problems in it. It's not going to be very helpful. The only people who ever thought to do it was some random economists. Okay, it's kind of sad. So, no, that's also crazy talk. There was a line in this paper. I didn't pull the slide. Maybe I'll add it in now. There was a line in this paper that basically said, we believe more randomized trials are needed. That's the gist of it. I'm going to put the quote on the screen. We believe more randomized trials are needed. That's the Cochrane group. Why does that sound so familiar? Was there somebody who looked at this evidence and said, you really ought to do more randomized studies? Oh, yeah, that's right. Me, repeatedly, for the whole pandemic. I kept saying it. You needed to do more randomized studies. It's a disgrace that you didn't do randomized studies. And who is the burden on? Is it on the person who doesn't think it's going to help? No, it's on the proponent. He who is the proponent has the burden to show it works. You need to do this study. I'm pretty sure the study won't be negative, okay? You can ask critics to help you design your study in a fair and balanced way, but if the burden is on you to show it works. Why do I think it's going to be negative? Because the pre-existing body of evidence is stone cold negative, and all the studies pooled together are stone cold negative, okay? And so I wrote this paper in MedPage today, Climbing the Pandemic Failures Chart, Research on Masking Kids. Prasad calls out the dearth of large empirical studies on benefits versus risks in kids. It's a huge failure. Last thing I'd say is I also wrote this piece in The Atlantic. The downside of masking young students are real. The educational cost of face coverings is far better established than the benefits of face covering, particularly mandates. I'm going to stop that screen. I'm going to have some closing thoughts here. Cochrane is good. Tom Jefferson is brilliant. He pre-registers everything and he does it dutifully. Okay? Unlike the nitwits all around us, he knows what good evidence is. It's randomized evidence. I see science debunkers who are so good at science they have been unable to secure a faculty position at any university, arguing that the Cochrane review is wrong because it doesn't ask the right question. The debunkers are wrong. Debunking on social media is really the lowest quality scientists with the largest political belief system and faith, claiming that they have the truth. They have no such claim on the truth. The truth is, the evidence is extremely weak. It's garbage evidence, practically. The truth is, we needed to do more randomized studies, and Tony Fauci and the CDC failed on that. The truth is, the evidence does show the effect size at best is a sliver, but most likely it's null. And the reason I say most likely it's null is because in the universe of biomedical interventions, most of them actually don't work. It's very difficult to improve upon nature. It's very difficult, okay? And wearing a flimsy t-shirt over your face or a spun surgical mask that's mass-produced in China and sold for pennies on the dollar, or wearing a poorly fitting N95 mask, wearing it in a sauna, that's just delusional. But even doing these things on the street, they're very unlikely to work. Non-compliance will be high. Their failure rates will be high, and they very likely, like most biomedical interventions, will fail. And the randomized evidence shows that it's failing in front of your eyes, and yet you still believe. And you cite evidence like hairdresser anecdotes. What are you talking about? Nobody in medicine has ever accepted anecdotes of some hairdresser. It's the lowest form of evidence. Why are we, for the biggest questions that affect the most people, reaching for the lowest evidence on the planet? Comparing counties, comparing different regions in America. This is a fool's errand. This became politicized. And do you really want me to believe that the only difference between places that have mask mandates and don't is the mask mandate? No, they have different beliefs in COVID in every dimension, and vaccines and hydroxychloroquine and all these other things. They have different beliefs in every dimension. How could you possibly use non-randomized data to make any conclusion? If you think you will, you're making a grievous mistake. And we've seen so many foolish analyses, and we're going to have some. I'm going to take this New England Journal to task when they start publishing this observational garbage. I got something in the works. We're going to publish it soon. I'm pretty sure you're not going to like it, New England Journal. Okay. Cochrane, good. Everyone else, wrong. Truth will come out. Evidence for masking, very poor. Fauci, he lied. But he didn't lie the first time when he said that, you shouldn't, I don't know if you're going to wear, what did he say? I don't know if you should wear a mask. You might touch your face, and we don't really think you ought to. That was the truth. And that might have been the last time he was telling the truth. And then every other time, that was the lie. And we kind of got that whole narrative backwards. Although some of us in Slate magazine, I tried to help, I tried to teach you, tried to explain it, but it's been a hard road. So those are my thoughts. Cochrane, read it. Think about it. Read my Substack post. I'll put a link to that below. This channel is going to get into everything biomedicine. COVID's going to end someday. I already don't care that much about it. Why do I even care? I'll be honest with you. Why do I even care? I care if the COVID zealots who want to avoid COVID forever, who are totally and farcically wrong, if they promise one thing, that they will not let their beliefs affect any policy. They'll let the kids go. They won't make Philadelphia do any masking or Ann Arbor do masking. Let other people go. Let the kids go, and let the colleges go. Don't make the college kids have any more booster mandates. You let go of these two things, the kids and the colleges, and I'll give you amnesty in the sense that I will no longer comment about your silly behavior that's non-scientific. I will still litigate the history. I got to set the historical record correct. We're going to publish many, many papers to do that. But I will let you go in the future, but you have to promise you're going to let the kids go and you're going to let the booster mandates lapse in the schools and the colleges. But if you want to impose your zealotry on others, we're going to have to keep talking about it. But we're also going to talk about other things. We're going to talk about colonoscopy. We're going to talk about med school rankings. We're going to talk about whatever's in the week's news. And this channel is going to be my unfettered thoughts from the point of view of a epidemiologist, professor, researcher who has, a certain way of looking at medical evidence. I happen to think it's the right way. I don't know Tom Jefferson. I never trained with Tom Jefferson. I mean, I met him one moment in life, but I didn't become the doctor I am because of Tom Jefferson. I can't credit him for that. But we are two independent people who pretty much have a very similar philosophy of looking at evidence, and there are many of us. How did that come to be? That came to be because It's the right philosophy. It is what EBM actually means. There are a few devotees of EBM, evidence-based medicine. There are a few of us out there. I think Todd Lee is a great one. I think John Ioannidis is a great one, probably one of the most legendary ones. I think there are many great EBM experts. They often agree, and it's funny how that works. All right, like this video, share it with a friend, comment below, leave a comment, that helps, and subscribe to this channel if you don't already, and send the channel to someone else and tell them to subscribe, okay? I'll be back, more videos, more discussions. Maybe I'll put some sensible medicine videos on that, on this channel. We'll see. Until next time.